participate, well, you risk a likelihood of losing your participant and having to forfeit any data that you've collected, right? So it's very important that you give as much disclosure, full disclosure if possible, to the participant so that the participant can be well informed and make decisions on his or her own. So, sort of obvious there, nothing too complicated. B, participant must understand that consent does not require completion of the research, right? This is what I'm talking about. Participant has to understand that insofar as he or she consents to the research, it in no sense requires him or her to facilitate the research or to its completion, right? Most times what you'll see is maybe an initial interview with the participant from the research or the research staff, graduate assistants, what have you, sort of a prep, maybe an informal lunch or dinner, sort of to set the stage and levels of comfort, and then maybe one or two interviews, right? So usually the interaction, depending on what type of qualitative research you're doing, this obviously doesn't include ethnography and ethnographic research, or really even participatory action. Participatory action and ethnographic research, you're there with the participants. You're surrounded by your participants. Whereas in qualitative analysis and narrative analysis, it might be maybe 2 interviews, 3 interviews the most. That's usually about the amount of time. Some, I know many qualitative, myself, I did, as a matter of fact, I think maybe barring 1 or 2 people, all of the qualitative data that I did for my dissertation I attained from 1 interview, right? I think about 90%, 80 or 90% of the people that I interviewed, I only interviewed them the one time, right? I prepped them, we spoke, we communicated, but the actual interview with the voice recorder going, I only had 1 shot at it. So the participant needs to recognize that even during that one-time interview, right? If this is the only opportunity that I'm going to have to interact with the participant needs to know that, and even before the interview, obviously, that he or she, during the middle of the interview, can forfeit participation, right? So just ethical concerns that need to be taken into account. We don't want to force the narratives. We don't want to force the stories. We don't want to force interaction. We want the participant of his or her own volition to willingly want to tell us, right? That's what we want, right? The desire to share your story. And you get a much richer data set. All right, so B is understood. C, participant must understand the specific roles played in the research and informed of the potential hazards of participation, right? The participant, part of this information needs to include, so when we're talking about the information, some of the things that we'll talk about is duration of research. We'll talk about levels of danger, hazards. We'll also, as we saw yesterday, we might talk about a third-party consideration, right? Based on this research, do you anticipate, based on what I've told you this research project is going to be about, do you anticipate that anyone else outside of myself and you, or my staff and you, would be adversely affected? Is there anything I might need to know? Well, what do you mean? Here's an example. Oh yeah, my son's coming into town to visit on Friday, and that might just bring up old bad stuff. I'm not really sure if I want to disclose this with him. If we have the research interview on that day, someone might ask, and then that might adversely affect someone else, or you get an idea, right? If we have the interview on this Tuesday morning, it might interfere with work, and then that might affect my colleagues at work, myself, right? You get the idea, right? So another piece of informational bit that we want to communicate is the relationship, as I said yesterday, relationship to third parties. Right. The nature of the relationship to affected, either directly or indirectly, and I talked about the distinction between directly or indirectly third parties. All right. D, I'm sort of going through this a little quickly because it's apparent. I don't want to belabor the point. D, researcher has the responsibility to ensure the continued consent of the participant, right? The researcher has the responsibility, right? The researcher assumes the responsibility for ensuring continued participation, right? And the fact that participation is continued is itself contingent on consent, right? So it's the responsibility of the researcher to sort of assess the level of comfort that the participant is having on an ongoing basis to assess whether the participant is still interested in the research. Now, obviously, and I recognize this, right? It's probably something that traditional professors might not sort of evoke in a lecture, but I've experienced it myself, and I know that is true, and I know that young graduate students are probably begging right now, Dr. Campbell, why don't you ask the question? And the question is something like this. Well, Dr. Campbell, isn't it the case that if you prompt the participant without them disclosing the fact that they're feeling uncomfortable, that the very prompt, the fact that I'm saying, hey, are you comfortable? Do you want us to stop for a minute, or how is it okay if I continue with the research? If I prompt them, then they might use that opportunity to forfeit consent. So isn't it better that I don't even prompt them? Because insofar as I prompt them, then it gives them an opportunity to say, hey, yeah, by the way, I'm not really liking the research. I didn't think it was going to go this route. I want out, right? Whereas if I don't prompt them, it's not that I'm forcing them. It's just that I haven't given them an opportunity. I would say from an ethical standpoint, you have to give them the opportunity, right? From a pedagogical standpoint, from an educational standpoint, it's imperative that they recognize, not just at the beginning of the research, right, but in the middle of the research, that they have this option to forfeit. So I'll give you a perfect example. If you are engaged in any form of qualitative research and you're moderately good at what you do, it's not surprising that you'll elicit some type of emotional response from your participant, right? Your participant might break down and start crying during the interview. The participant regularly will probably, laugh and chuckle, either nervously or actual sort of genuine laughter in the interview. But when you see someone, sobbing, crying emotionally, it's important that at that moment you give them that opportunity. Hey, Mr. So-and-so, I'm not trying to bring up the past, and I don't want you to have to relive this if it's too difficult for you. Should we stop? Do you need a break? Should we continue? Oh, no, sure. So you're not asking should you terminate the research, right? But should I pause for a little bit? Let me give you time, a little bit of space for yourself. Assess what the participant says then, right? If the participant says, yeah, I need a little space, that's just a little too much, give them the space. Let them then gauge their level of engagement, because it's the idea is that the ball's in their court, right? In order to resume the interview, they, of their own volition, would have to come back and say, okay, fine, I've composed myself, I've collected myself, I'm ready again, right? So you always want to empower your participant with the understanding that the duration of their participation in your research is contingent wholly on them, right? That is absolutely imperative, right? So yes, you do at several points, checkpoints, arbitrary though they might be, engage your participant with an opportunity to forfeit participation. Okay, so that's C. D, researcher has the responsibility to ensure, oh no, I just did D, sorry. E, the terms of participants' consent, if any, must always be open to renegotiation, right? So the terms of their consent, have to be continually open to renegotiation. Now, this doesn't typically happen, this idea of negotiation, but the idea might be something like this. Mary, is it okay if I talk to you about your involvement, back in 1982 with respect to X? Mary says, I don't feel comfortable discussing that. Well, Mary, here's why the research is important, and here's what I hope to do. Oh wow, that would be good. Yeah, I think I would, but in order for me to participate, here's what I'm going to need from you, right? I'd rather us not do it in the university setting or in a library. Let's go out to eat dinner or somewhere informal, blah blah blah. Okay, sure, no problem. It's a pretty easy negotiation. Go out to eat somewhere formal, start to record it, no problem. Hey, Jason, I really don't want my conversation recorded. I don't mind you if you take notes, but I'd rather you don't record the audio. Okay, sure, no problem, right? The whole idea is that throughout the process, you want to renegotiate. And this is what's important. The renegotiation don't think of it in a negative sense that